Mark, Jeroen, welcome to Davos. We're here to talk about the future of the workplace. Mark, you're CEO of Accenture Group. Can you tell me a little bit more about the nature of the work that you do?
Yeah, certainly. I lead the strategy group at Accenture, which is essentially the 15 or 17,000 people at Accenture who do strategy work for our clients. So project work, mostly in the digital age, mostly technology-based strategy in every industry that Accenture works in.
Fantastic. And Jeroen, you're CEO of Connected Care and Health Informatics at Philips. What does that mean?
Well, what it means is that we deliver the systems for intensive care units, the patient monitors, the ventilators, the defibrillators to help people with their hearts. But we're also creating the workstations for the clinicians, for the radiologists, the cardiologists, the oncologists, neurologists. And we're connecting patients to their caregivers at home. So that's roughly what we do.
So Mark and Jeroen, you've got incredible insight in how the workplace is changing. And I think it's a reasonable bet that it's going to be unrecognizable 5-10 years from now compared with where it's now. But let's talk about the present. Because Mark, in your research, you talk about technology, but you also talk about how the productivity rate is slowing. So how do you reconcile the fact that we have more and more connected devices, there's more Slack, more email, more instant messaging, more mobile phones, and yet with all this technology, productivity is slowing?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Ed, and something we wrestle with every day. It's clearly more than just technology, things that are going on in the macro economy of the world, and everything is clearly feeding into jobs. But our view is that digital and technology in general is a job creation machine over time, but because it's happening so quickly, it's a disruption, as we call it here in Davos, the fourth industrial revolution, that's happening in a very compressed period of time. So it's dislocating many jobs at the same time it's creating jobs, and it's getting the dislocated workers, if you will, to find new work. That is the challenge, I think, of executives in the digital age.
But let's talk about us as individuals. With our mobile phones, with our email, instant messaging, do you feel as individuals more productive than you were 5 years ago?
Yeah, I feel definitely more productive, but I work at a different level. It gives me a better overview of what's going on in different parts of the company. It allows me to communicate with, actually directly with many of the 1,000 people that are on my teams. So it gives me a different way of connecting to the people within the company. Mm-hmm. And I think it's for the good, to be honest.
But there's some research that shows that we spend as many as 6 hours a day on email. Surely that can't be good for productivity.
Yeah, I think it's clearly stretched most people's day. And you see backlashes in some countries where they're trying to manage the actual hours that people are engaged and having to restrict time that they can stay connected via these mechanisms. But I agree that I think it's an overall productivity enhancer when it's used carefully and right. It allows me also to stay in touch with people. And I would say, as a consultant, as a strategist, it's dramatically affected our work. I would say it's a third less time for us to deliver the work to our clients than it used to be because of the whole information gathering stage of a project that you can imagine has been compressed to near zero. So I think it's helped us be more productive, though it has the effects that you had mentioned, Ed, of people being connected all the time.
Okay, now the big buzzword in Davos this year is artificial intelligence. Before we dive into artificial intelligence, can you give us a definition, Jeroen, of artificial intelligence that a 4-year-old can understand?
Yeah, sure. Artificial intelligence is the ability of computers to have cognitive skills, to learn and find patterns. And it's fundamentally different from what we've done in automation before, because we largely automated processes that were guided by rules and workflow, so if then else. And now suddenly we started looking at things that human beings are good at, understanding, seeing patterns, applying the knowledge that you derive from looking at the data, making insights, making decisions. And that's a completely different game than what we've been automating so far.
But let's go right back to 1968. In 1968, Stanley Kubrick created a film called Space Odyssey 2001. And this had this amazing computer called HAL that eventually had such incredible cognitive skills, it took over from the master. The machine became the master. But 2001 came and went. and how never happened. So some people would argue that artificial intelligence has overpromised and underdelivered. I mean, Mark, what's your response to that?
Well, I think we're certainly a long way from any world that looks like HAL, in my view, and from what I have been able to read of people who do a lot of research in this space, truly human capable kind of characteristics are decades away rather than right here. So I think sort of setting aside the hype and the reality, you wanted to add focus on the reality, I think what artificial intelligence is doing today is really augmenting thinking in many people's jobs. And I think it's come about very recently because of the complete drop in the costs of computing, the costs of storage, and the cost of communication. When I was a strategist starting my career, any strategy, you had to actually think of what was the cost of the technology to actually implement the strategy. Well, today at our clients, it's really not that big a consideration because with the cloud computing, the cost of compute is zero. Telecommunications have been close to zero for a while. And who thinks about storage anymore? You have as much storage on your iPhone as some companies used to have 20 years ago. So that has created this incredible opportunity to process huge amounts of data and make sense of it, which is what I think Jeroen, one of the things is pointing out with artificial intelligence. It's making sense of the data that exists, and the costs of that have gone to near zero.
And Jeroen, I want to come to some practical examples, but so it's for real, right? Artificial intelligence
it's absolutely
now,
for real.
It's for real, and it's going to be changing a significant array of industries. And Jeroen, you're in the healthcare sector.
Yeah.
What are the one or two examples that are getting you really excited about the potential for artificial intelligence?
Well, I'm really excited about what we recently launched, which is artificial intelligence for radiologists.
Right.
And it allows them to look, for instance, at a cancer over time and identify how much the cancer has grown. It allows them to interpret the images, but it also allows them, for instance, to look at a disease like MS, which, you know, on an MR picture looks like a stellar constellation. So if you do two studies and you can calculate the differences, you can also see the efficacy of medication, which is very hard for the human eye to see. We can now start seeing Alzheimer's, you know, before you see the symptoms, because we look at what's called brain atrophy, and actually your brain is shrinking. You didn't know that, but it's shrinking. It's really a matter of how much it shrinks, and you can start measuring that, which is impossible to see with the naked eye. Then what we do, we compare it to normal. So you can start looking at these complex things. Now, you can also start looking, if you look at a cancer on an image, you can start looking at the cell structure. You can start looking at, you know, what are the biomarkers of that disease. Now you can even take a genome sequence of those cells, because cancer is a disease of the cells. Now you have so much information coming together that it's impossible for a human to process all of that. So we're now capable of processing all that information, looking at a very precise diagnosis, and compare that with a whole range of treatments, and then find the optimal treatment for this specific person. That's impossible without this technology.
So we're talking about the workplace. Let's talk about doctors in this particular example. So the doctor of the future is going to be a very different type of person to the doctor of the present.
Yeah.
What sort of skills will a doctor need?
I think a doctor, a specialist, will become much more of a data scientist. So they will be able, at the complex information, and based on that, do their diagnosis and treatment. But you'll see that in healthcare, jobs will change. Because at the end of the day, healthcare is also about human connection. It's about the trust you create with your patients. It's about the support you give people with chronic disease, which is already half of the population in the US are either at risk or have a chronic disease. So we have to change the workforce around care. And I think it creates tremendous opportunities to do the things that are truly human. While at the other side, we will use a lot of technology to be much better in detecting things, much more precise in the diagnosis, and much more personalized in the treatment.
But there are obstacles in the way, aren't there? I mean, for example, a lot of data is siloed, a lot of data is unstructured. So to get from where we are now to where you're describing, it's not just the technology. There's going to be a number of workflow changes that will presumably be required.
Absolutely. By the way, unstructured data is what artificial intelligence is good at. So I was just talking about how we interpret images or interpret genome sequences. But yeah, there are basic issues, like people still work in silos. People like to sit on their data. Systems don't communicate in the way they should. But I think a lot of these issues will be resolved. I think at the end of the day, the bigger issue is how people work. You know, if people still continue to work in their own little world, in their departments, doing their own little thing and sit on their data, we're not going to see this increase in productivity. I think it comes out when you transcend the silos, when you bring different disciplines together. And we started seeing that in healthcare as well, where the different specialists work together and organize around patients, which is not really the case today. If you go into a hospital, it's organized around specialists.
So very different job of a doctor and very different workflows. But Mark, let's zoom out for a moment. Let's look at the bigger picture with artificial intelligence. The chief economist of the Bank of England is on the record as saying that in the UK alone, robotics and artificial intelligence could destroy 15 million jobs. That's roughly 50% of the jobs in the UK. What's your view on that? Are we heading for a dystopian world where a few people have incredible jobs and everybody else is out of a job?
Well, I think he could be right. I think there will be some jobs destroyed, many jobs destroyed, but we're going to create many more, we believe, through this. And I think...
So you're saying net increase in jobs or net decrease in jobs?
No, I think there'll be a net increase in jobs through this, but the jobs are different and they're organized differently, what Jeroen was commenting on. And I think, well, two comments to start. One, automation always automates tasks, not full jobs. And I think that's an important concept. A task is automated, a job is not automated. Now, because technology is becoming quickly more effective and having more inputs, and with artificial intelligence processing, that task is growing in complexity that it can do. But AI is automating tasks, not jobs. And I think I'll give a couple of other examples, but healthcare is a perfect one. We need more healthcare workers in this world. We can't afford it the way we're doing it right now. Both AI and automation in general is increasing the productivity of our healthcare workforce. We need it, but we're going to be hiring healthcare workers by the tens of thousands in this world, and we need to hire them in a more productive system than we have them now. So it's a job creation engine, which we need, and AI and robotics and automation are helping us to do that. And maybe to give a couple of other...
Yeah, let's take a different industry. I mean, what about something like banking, right? I mean, surely banking's in for a rough ride with this technology. So many of those tasks that are done in a retail bank, at any rate, can now be automated.
Yeah, and I think there's a great example in banking, which is perhaps a bit counterintuitive. People would think that the number of tellers must be dropping dramatically because everything that a teller, someone who you would walk up to in a retail bank branch, should be done by a robot or automated. But in fact, when you look at the rise of the ATMs or the automated teller machines and other technologies, the employment in tellers have actually grown. The question is, what do they do? Because when you've taken off so many of the tasks that a teller used to do and put it into a machine or made it online, you've made that teller more productive. You've made that teller less expensive for the bank. So what they've done is they've hired more tellers, but they do different jobs. They have relationship banking responsibilities. They're looking for other products that they can serve you with from a bank when you go into a branch. They're not doing the low-end tasks that they used to do. So it didn't destroy jobs. We're still creating jobs. So
both examples that you've cited, in the medical and in banking, we're talking about professions that are changing very profoundly. And at the same time, we're all going to be expected to work a lot longer. I mean, retirement almost feels like an obsolete concept. How are we going to reconcile the duality of ever-accelerating technology and having to work for a longer career? What does that mean in terms of education, training? I mean, Mark, what are your thoughts?
Well,
on that?
I think, first of all, I think it's a good thing we're all getting to work longer because it means we're living longer, right? I think this is really happening because the lifespans from, the turn of the century, which were in the late 50s and early 60s, have moved almost to 80. So it's giving us all a chance to be more productive for longer periods of time. But I think we're seeing a dramatic change in how people want to work. You know, in our research that we recently published, 75% of the workforce in 10 years will be millennials, those born after 1990. 30% already are. Their expectations of work and a job are very different than the expectations of prior workers. They want faster, project-based, end-to-end sorts of things that move quickly. And to do that, they're willing to teach and train themselves to do different tasks. They're not looking to come out and get a job for 5 years or 10 years and a career at a company. It's not
But what
their
are the
interest.
education implications? I mean, as things currently stand, you know, you have a burst of education, you're done by the time you're 21, there's a little bit of HR training along the way, and then you retire.
Yeah.
That model surely is broken.
Yeah, of course it's broken. Like, you know, I don't want to think about retirement. You know,
Right.
I probably your life's going to look like this, you know, in terms of work. And the same applies to training. You know, it would be crazy. You know, I was trained as a computer scientist. A lot of what I learned is completely irrelevant today.
Right.
You know, I have to completely reset and
But how do you do that? I mean, how are we going to train
Well,
people to...
you got to take the time off to do that. But I think technology plays a big role there. The massively open online courses, you know, hold a great promise. Now suddenly you can, you know, do a lecture or, you know, get classes from the best professors in the world anywhere. And I know my son, who's a millennial, you know, has a great job, but he studies in the weekends. He wants to learn, you know, artificial intelligence. He was not trained for it. He said, I gotta understand this.
But aren't we heading towards a future where you've got people like your son, who are well educated, have got the discipline to continue to educate themselves throughout a career, and then everybody else? And isn't there a big risk that we're kind of creating a society where you've got people who are highly technologically able, who are very good at self-educating, who are very disciplined, and then you've got everybody else. The 15 million people that the Chief Economist of the Bank of England was referring to. What's going to happen to those people who are not continuously educating themselves, who are not developing those technology-related skills, Mark?
Well, I would say in this recent work that I cited, we found that almost 90% of the workers, and this was a broad-based survey, not just high-end college-educated workers, want to learn. And they know that technology is displacing their jobs. So I think the counterintuitive point I would make is they want to learn and they want to do things differently. They're just not being enabled to do it. We have a concept at Accenture that we call time away to learn and learning all the time. We create opportunities for our consultants to constantly refresh their learning. They have to do it, but we have to create these platforms where they're constantly learning on the job and through, whether it's massively online open courses, MOOCs, or others.
In fact, you've just retrained 20,000 people, or and their job has changed quite profoundly, hasn't it? I mean, with automation and robotics. Have some of those people lost their jobs as a result of that and been replaced by machines?
Yeah, and this is in Accenture operations where we are running programs, running things for our clients. We're automating things all the time. We call it the microbots. We look for the tasks they're doing in their job that technology now, whether it's through visualization or others, we can eliminate. And then we find ways to either make them more productive at those current clients or a new job for them. So we're still hiring into this operations practice. Even though we eliminated 20,000 jobs, we hired 20,000 people. It's productivity that then feeds back to our clients' benefit. And
I want to make one point though. We can use the same technology to help people train. You know, we're looking at gamification, you know, games to teach people new skills, virtual reality, augmented reality. So, you know, you learn a new set of skills, but you're augmented by the technology. And we found that doesn't make a big difference what your background is. You know, everybody can be get excited about learning as a game. So I think we need to be much more creative also in how we bring, you know, the 15 million people along.
And you know, just at the high end, the $100,000 a year MBA, surely that's not long for this world, is it, Mark?
I don't know. It's probably too hard for me to predict. I think there will be business schools around for quite some time, and I think they're going to be producing graduates who earn in that zone. I think the question is, what are they going to be doing, and what skills do they get coming through those programs? I think you referred, maybe Ed, in one of your questions a moment ago, that maybe our education system has to be adjusted, because what we see our clients doing and what we're doing as Accenture is changing our training programs because we're not getting the skills we want. There are plenty of jobs to be had, but the skills aren't out there, so we're retraining people, and I think eventually that has to play its way back into the education system and certainly in the MBA programs, who need to produce different skill sets when their students coming out, not the same.
Now, you mentioned your son, he's a millennial. Millennials' expectations of the workplace are fundamentally different,
Absolutely,
right?
yep.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, what we found is that they want to work in teams.
Right.
And they want to work with people with different disciplines, which I think is perfect because that's what we need.
Mm-hmm.
So we put teams together where we have programmers, but also designers, clinical experts, operational people, and we put them on one team. And they create a deliverable together. They have to learn to speak each other's language, and increasingly you want to understand, and you mentioned this as well, what's our role in the bigger picture? You know, how do we contribute to the value? And we also find that a lot of people are sensitive to, you know, the mission of the company. So we explicitly have a mission where we said we want to have a positive impact on the lives of 3 billion people by 2025. We already have 370 million patients that are hooked up to our monitors in their moment of needs. And we see that this appeals to a lot of people. It gives them a sense of purpose in their work as well. So it's both the inherently more interesting work because you work with other people and you work together on something, but also you have a deeper purpose in your work. And I think all these aspects are really important.
So more mission-based,
Yeah.
more project-based. And Mark, you're seeing that in your research as well, right? There's that the expectation of millennials is that the work will be project-based.
Yeah, and I think, just to build on something Jeroen said, I think that is where a lot of learning happens. So there's formal learning for sure. I think that's going to play a role. But when you're on a project with designers, with computer scientists, trying to do a project end to end, that's where you have a massive amount of learning. And I think that's what fuels their passion and interest. And so what we're seeing are, both in our clients and in Accenture, the millennials wanting single-digit month sorts of projects. That has a conclusion to it. They've created something out of it and then to move on. And I think it has profound implications for our large clients who need to design not a functional role or job, but something that is more project-based and that people can move around the company and do different things over short periods of time. And I'll give one example. In our technology part of our job, we used to have testers, people who would test software, test a product. They're going away. That job, that task is going away. And it's not a task people love to do anymore anyway. Testing is built into the process through automation. We're now taking that skilled person and they're coming in to design a product that delivers an outcome. A much better job in the end, and automation is taking one task out. So we're redesigning around that. The other implication that we talk about in this report is a liquid workforce. We're seeing ourselves, but also many of our clients, hiring people project-based, not hiring them into the company with an expectation of a 5 or 10 or 20-year career just for this particular project. And so the economy of individuals who are self-hiring, if you will, their own little companies and entities with good skill sets is growing dramatically, and companies need to learn to tap into that, what we call liquid workforce.
But that's got profound implications for the way that traditional companies are organized, which is really around departments. Large monolithic departments that often don't talk to each other particularly well. And what you're describing is far more project-based, far more task-orientated. That's a big leap.
But if you think about it, still a lot of companies still bear the remains of a 100-year-old model.
Right.
You know, the assembly line. You decompose work into functions. All the marketing guys sit with marketing. You know, the guys on the assembly line sit together. And now you're breaking that up. you basically say, I'm going to pool these disciplines, I'm going to put them together, I'm going to make it more open, more fluid, because some of these specialists I may even crowdsource, or I have them temporarily on my team. But that creates a lot of fluidity, but also makes it much more interesting. And I totally agree with your comments. You know, on-the-job learning you do because you're talking to other people that bring different perspectives.
Yeah.
And I think that's the future of work, and that can be very exciting because it's much more direct. And people say, you know, automation makes jobs, you know, disappear. But I think automation can be a huge augmentation to the way you do your job. It can enrich a job if we just understand how to apply that technology to the job.
And Mark, in your research, I think one of the statistics that you cite is that 76% of millennials are more interested in freelance work. It's a very closely related point. In other words, they'll come in, they'll work on a project, but they then want to move on. Again, big structural change for the way that companies are used to working.
Yeah, for sure. And they have the skills to make those expectations a reality. So they don't, you know, they know they can get a job in the next place doing that. And so we're adjusting to that demand. And I think Jeroen is absolutely right. It's only the leaders of these companies can change the way work is done. And that's why we have been saying it's, whether it's the CEO or the most senior leaders in the company, they have to get engaged to redesign the way work is done. That's the bottleneck right now, because we have these organizations that were structured to do a task, whether it's marketing or testing, as I gave the example, because we wanted experts in that. Well, technology is changing what an expert is, and we're bringing these multidisciplines together to do something that couldn't be done before, and only the most senior people in a company can change the way work is organized, in effect.
So let's sum up a little bit about some of the conclusions of this. So what we're saying is that technology is going to play a much larger role, and in particular, artificial intelligence. We're saying that keeping your skill set current is going to be an overwhelming priority for all of us. But we're also saying that corporate structures are going to be very different, far more project and task focused. But in aggregate, it sounds like the future of the workplace is quite an exciting place.
Yeah, I think it is. I think we're still somewhere in between. You know, we're still with one foot in our, you know, functional world, and we're in one foot in the new world. But if we completely transition to the new world, if we work with millennials that like to work that way, I think it can be all for the good. And, you know, especially millennials that have learned how to learn, because that's going to be the way of the future. So I think the issues we have right now is because we still have a big generation in the workforce that was brought up in the assembly line model, if you will.
So it needs to change pretty quick. Mark, Jeroen, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.